Hello again, this is Pastor Tim Brewer at Lomita and Bend United Methodist Churches. We're serving Central Texas and the small communities that we live, proclaiming Christ and helping our neighbor. We would invite you to our podcast, our live worship service, our live stream on Sunday morning at 9 o'clock. If you want to join us, we have a good time. We are doing the Bible because we think it's important to know the Bible as our own history. This is our family history. And there's been less and less people actually know the stories of the Bible, so we've been telling the stories. We went with themes of the Bible, and then we went with different books of the Bible, and now we're telling stories about people. So we're going to be talking about Peter today. Peter was an interesting man. He ended up being the leader of the new church, but it wasn't without some struggles. He was one of those people who opened his mouth and began talking before he began to think. And so sometimes he got himself in trouble by being the spokesperson for everyone and getting it wrong. But Jesus picked him. Jesus saw the potential in him. And remember that Peter was not an educated man. He was not somebody who was studying the scriptures all day long like the Pharisees or the scribes. He was a fisherman. That's what he knew. That's what his family did. So that's what he did. And he left that to follow Jesus. At one point they asked Jesus, who do people say that I am? And they gave all positive answers. And then they said, who do you say that I am? And Peter stood up and talked for the whole group and said, you are the Christ, the Son of God. And then just moments later, when Jesus was describing what that meant and that he must suffer and die, Peter says, no, we're not going to have any of that. We didn't sign up for suffering and dying. So Peter sometimes took a while to get it. He was given the keys to the kingdom, the keys to heaven and keys to hell, but that wasn't in order to control it. That was in order to open the gates of heaven, to share the gospel, and to let people in. And he was given the keys to the gates of hell so that they could storm the place. They could do it for Christ's sake. He was described as the first pope, but he may not have been the first leader of the church. James was the leader of Jerusalem before that time, when they tore down Jerusalem, when the Romans came in 70 AD and tore down the city and expelled all the Jews along with the Christians. James was maybe the most powerful man in the church, but because they were scattered, Peter took a much more important, prominent role. He, along with Paul, which we'll get to another day. But Peter became the head of the church, and he was described as the first pope. Interestingly enough, Peter was married, and so that's interesting that the first pope was married, but the ones after that were not, because they're supposed to resemble Christ and what Christ did. I don't think Jesus really cared whether they were married or not. I think Jesus cared about the mission of proclaiming the kingdom of God, inviting people in, loving people into the kingdom, lifting up those who are downtrodden. And that's really the purpose of the church. That's the purpose of the leadership. Peter later on was not a prolific writer, but he was a leader of people. And when he came to the point of dying, he said he didn't feel like he deserved to be crucified right side up, so he asked to be crucified upside down. He and almost all the disciples except John met a violent early death, so they really did pick up the cross and carry it following Jesus. They gave up everything. But Peter was willing to take charge, and he was willing to lead. And people need a leader. Without a leader, there's no vision. A leader is supposed to gather all the people together and provide a larger vision than what they would individually in their own particular part of that community. A compelling vision that leads them forward, and that's what Peter did because the church went forward. At Pentecost, he was the spokesperson for the church, proclaiming what was going on, that they weren't drunk, that the Spirit had come upon them just like the prophets had predicted, and because he talked about Jesus, and they had thousands of people that day joined the church, and the church was off and running with Peter at the head. He made mistakes. He spoke sometimes before he was ready to think through it, but he was exactly the person that Jesus needed to be in his place to lead the church into the ministry that it had to do. Okay, we'll see you next time.